And I want to shift now to some questions that you ask. But let me ask, Georgia, would you like folks to take a break for a few minutes? Or
only if you wish to have a break, because we've been talking
fine.
For an hour.
I
could listen to you for the next 3 or 4 hours. So I think I'm speaking on behalf of everyone. We don't need a break if you don't need one.
Okay, so then we'll go to some questions that you ask, and I will put some of these examples together to show you what I'm talking about, and hopefully I can find questions that go to some of those strategies. But one question that you asked was how we can have differentiated tasks in an online environment without the students realizing the gap between them. And I'm going to answer that in 2 ways. And one of those, I hope I'm going to get to a little more on before we sign off. But one of the most important things I learned to do with my students, and I did not learn this the first year or the second year or the third year, I can't tell you when it was, but it became clearer and clearer to me that my success in this area was going to have a lot to do with their success. And that was to help them, not just to start differentiating for them, but to help them understand differentiation as a philosophy. And to give them a chance to talk about whether that made sense to them or not. And if so, how we could work together to make that happen. And so I'm going to I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I mean for that, and then skip down to an example in this set just a little bit further. Kids know how to play school. We all knew how to play school when we were little. Where I grew up, we'd sit on somebody's porch and the teacher was the kid that was in charge, and that teacher told us what to do. And if we weren't good, they kicked us off the porch and we had to do what we were told. In some funny level, kids know that. Everybody does the same stuff. The teacher's up front. Some kids get it, some kids don't get it. And now I'm saying, how does that work well for you? Could we do better? What would it look like if we did that? Is it the very best thing for all of you to do the same work all the time? How much sense does it make that you always have to finish the same thing in the same length of time? And it's kind of like this crazy lady doesn't know how to play school. So if I'm just doing this stuff to them, it's not going to be as successful as if I do stuff with them. So let me switch here down toward the bottom and give you a couple of examples, or an extended example of what I mean. For me, doing something that started this discussion of what might this class look like for us and how might it function was super important. And after a while, not the first or second or third years I did this, but after a while, almost always the first or second day of school, I would do some kind of an activity with the kids, kind of like Georgia's puzzle, which by the way was a very cool modeling activity she did to get you to speak up in an environment that was a little intimidating. And she did that well, and so did you. I tried to do something with the kids that could start a conversation. And I did different things, different years, just so it was fresh for me. But one idea I used sometimes was this one. I would go to the lost and found in my school, and I would get the biggest jacket I could find and the smallest jacket or sweater I could find. And then when kids came into class, I would stop them at the door. So it's probably the second or third day of school. I wouldn't have wanted to do this to them the first day. And as kids came in, I'd say, I need somebody who's willing to be up in front of the class and put on a coat for me in a little while. Would you do that for me? And if you don't want to, it's perfectly okay. And I could, you sometimes can find the lively kids that are bouncing around and talking to each other. And most of the time they said yes, but if they didn't, I'd say, that's just fine. I'll call on you for something else before too long. So when the kids came up, I put the big kid in the little jacket and the little kid in the big jacket. And as you can imagine, with 12-year-olds, there was a fair amount of giggling going on. And so then I would say to them, okay, let's listen to them and see how these guys feel about what they're wearing. And so I'd ask the kid in the clothes that were too small how he felt. Well, I can't breathe. I can hardly move my arm. It pinches. It's not comfortable. Big kid, I'm about to drown in this. I get lost in this. I can't even find my hands. And after everybody had giggled for a couple of more minutes, I'd say, okay, let me ask you another question. What would you say if I told you you had to wear this all day today? And honestly, the looks on their face would change. You're not going to do that to me, are you? That would be terrible to have this on for a whole day. And they talked about that in a slightly more serious way. I said, okay, we have 178 days left to go in school. What if you had to keep these clothes on for the whole 178 days? They can be washed, but every time you come back to school, you have to wear this. And they got much more serious really quickly. Kids would begin to think I was crazy. My sleeves would get caught in the food in the lunch line. If I keep growing, I kind of think these clothes would actually split on me. They wouldn't even fit me anymore. I think I'd start thinking about myself differently. And after we did that conversation for 10 minutes maybe, and everybody had calmed down again, say, okay, I want to ask all of you a question. This is for everybody, not just the two in the front of the room. Why did I do this? Why did I get people to put on the wrong size of clothes right here at the opening of school? And I certainly can't tell you that every kid in the class understood why I did that at that moment. But in all of the times that I did that, 5 classes a day for about 20 years, when this was the task, somebody's hand would go up and they'd say, well, it's kind of like school. Sometimes it's not a very good fit. And if we always have to do work that's kind of beneath where we are, or stuff that we don't understand at all yet, we feel like these guys. And as soon as someone had managed to say something like that, I was good to go. So we talked about their experiences. Tell me a time in school when you're like the kid with the clothes that are too big. It's too much, too fast. You're swimming around in them. You feel like it's for somebody 3 years older than you. And they could all tell me the time. Sometimes I'd say, tell me about a time in sports or in your house or, you know, some activity that you do. They all had those times when they felt like they were sinking, and they knew how it felt, and it wasn't good. And many of them had had activities to do, especially at home, when they're 10 years old or 12 years old, and their mother is making them do what their 7-year-old brother does because he'll be upset if they don't both have to do it. They can tell you those experiences, and they know it makes them impatient, restless, feel disrespected. They've got that language. So I would ask them a question. Do you think we can create a class where much of the time, not 100%, but much of the time, what we do is a good fit for everybody? What would that mean? How would it look? How would it work out? And so we talked about that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And ultimately, I would say to them, so what if this were our goal? We're going to create a class where at least a good bit of the time, there are clothes that are your size, clothes that kind of represent your interests, clothes that maybe can grow as you grow a little bit, where we can adapt clothes, tailor them for particular needs and occasions. Would that feel better than a class where there's one jersey that all of you are supposed to wear all the time? And they were pretty sure that was much better. So that was the genesis of my conversation with the kids. And that conversation continued daily for 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes sometimes, 2 or 3 minutes sometimes, and then on and off for the whole rest of the year. And I kept coming back to, why would we want to create a class where not everybody's doing the same? And they could tell you, because we have to grow from where we start growing. The second line is an old one, and I leave it here because it's a reminder of how long ago it was, but because we aren't carbon copies of each other. Most of you who are younger don't even know what those are. Maybe now it would be appropriate to say because we're not Xeroxes of each other. because all of us need to develop our talents. And in those areas, we might work fast or more deeply. And because all of us have to shore up our weak points, and we all have some. We might do different things just because we like different things or learn in different ways or have different strengths. When we talked about what it would look like, the kids could tell you sometimes we might read different books or have different activities or different homework or different projects. We might have individuals doing different things in the classroom sometimes, or small groups doing different things. Sometimes it might be important just to have different lengths of time that kids can work on things, or it's going to be a time when I just need to focus on my thing. It doesn't even matter what anybody else is doing. I got to get this show on the road, and this is how. It means that we'll have to learn how to be colleagues and support one another. We'll have to be organized in how we start class or start group work, stop class and stop group work. We'll have to know how to get help in an appropriate way. We'll probably have to keep records of what we're doing, and you'll have to keep records of different things that we're doing. We'll have classroom goals, but sometimes we'll set our own goals. And we'll have to have learning routines that let us shift from one thing to another in a reasonable way. Those conversations that continued throughout the year really resulted in the fact that if a visitor came into our class within 3 or 4 weeks of the start of school, and the visitor had said to a kid, "This looks different. What is this?" The student could have told you exactly what it was and why it was, and what they needed to do and what I needed to do, and how they worked together and how they worked independently. And in that way, it became our class, not just mine. So here's what I think, and you can tell me if you think I'm dead wrong. That would not be a first. I think kids know when they come to 7th grade who's really a good reader and who's not. I think they learn within the first week of a language class, if they hadn't already figured it out, who's a fast learner in here and who's scared out of their socks. A colleague of mine said once that he thought that at a very young age, kids are keenly aware that the act of birth is inherently unfair. Some kids are born gorgeous and some aren't. Some kids are born with strong bodies and some aren't. Some kids are born with a great sense of humor and some aren't. Some are born to parents with great wisdom about how to raise them and some aren't. And I think kids learn that very quickly. My belief is that when I acted as though there were no differences in their learning, I looked like the only idiot in the classroom because they knew better. If what I could say to them is, you know this, you see it in your family, you see it all around you. We learn at different rates. We have different strengths. We come at learning different ways. I think it would be hideously boring if we were all in exactly the same place all the time with the same interest and the same approaches. That'd be deadly. And I would share stories with them. For example, a friend of mine, when we were young, a long time ago, had a father who, before women were supposed to be able to do everything, said to her from the time she was born, "You can do anything you want to do. There's no limit to it. There's no thing that guys do or women do solely. You can do anything you want to do. If you make up your mind you want to do it, you can do it." She'd heard that almost daily for her whole life. So she had been in a place where it was not possible for her to learn how to swim for any length of time. And so when they moved to a place when she was about 8 years old that had swimming lessons, her father signed her up and said to her, "Remember, you can do anything you want to do." And left, of course, because he was supposed to leave. And that day, all the swim coach wanted to do was get the kids to talk with each other and get to know each other and kind of understand who he was and how they would run the swimming class. So he was on the deck of the swimming pool in his sweatsuit, not in a swimsuit. And as they did a lot of get to know each other exercises, and he did some strength kinds of things with them to kind of get a sense of what their body strength was, he ended by saying, okay, now I want to see what you can do in this swimming pool. So if you're new to this, I want you to come down to this end of the pool and I'm going to ask you to do something. Just get in now and stand there. If you have had some experience with swimming, but maybe it's been a little while or you weren't quite finished learning yet, come get in the pool here toward the middle. And for just a second, stand, and I'm going to give you something to do in a minute. And if you're an experienced swimmer, if you're good at swimming, come down here to the deep end and get in. And in a minute, I'll ask you something to do. Well, she wanted to be a good swimmer and her dad had said she could do anything she wanted to. And so she jumped in the deep end and discovered, in fact, that there are some hidden messages about effort and time in that you can do anything you want to do. It doesn't mean instantaneously. And the coach had to jump in his sweatsuit and dig her out so she didn't choke to death. We're at all different parts of the pool with everything, with world language, with math, with social skills. And that one of the best things we can do to a group of kids is to say, right now, you're you. That's who you are. You are where you are. You got here by doing the best you know how. You will continue to grow, but you didn't all grow it to the same exact point, and that will continue for the year. So it makes very little sense to me for you to be at that swimming pool and be in the wrong end of it. The way you're going to learn to swim is to learn to swim, not to jump in and sink. So that's how we're going to work. Lots of times we'll all do the same thing. So that's not weird either, but there are going to be times when you need to be in the right end of the pool. A line from a book that I love written about it's a children's book called Absolutely Almost, written about a little boy who has some sort of a learning challenge. The author never names it. I suspect it's mild autism, but anyhow, he has a lot of learning difficulties. And at one point he's talking to a math teacher who is head of what they call math club, but the little boy understands that that's his math class and it's not a normal math class. And he says to the teacher, I just want to go in my room where all my friends are and do math like everybody else. And the line that the teacher says to him with a lot of explanation and tenderness, so it's not just this, but he ends his conversation by saying, you can't get where you're going without being where you are. You can't get where you're going without being where you are. If I had known that line when I was a teacher in middle school, it would have been pasted at the front of my room in large, cheerful letters. You can't get where you're going without being where you are. So that question to me is an extraordinarily important one. And I think the more we help students understand what we're thinking and get their contributions to it and continue to say, how can we all work together to make this work the best? When it doesn't work, say to them, how'd you feel about what happened today? We said these were some things we wanted. How did we do today? Yeah, I agree. We didn't do very well. So what do we need to do tomorrow to make it better? And continue with that sort of approach. I think that makes things a team effort and makes it much more likely that the kids will go with you. On the other hand, let me see if I can find this quickly. It's also really important, whether it's online or in person, that we design the work that we give kids to be respectful, which means that everybody's work looks equally cool. I don't have a cool task like the puzzle that Georgia did for some kids and just a sheet of drill and practice where you fill in blanks for another. It may be that I'm going to say to the kids, some of you are going to be doing a puzzle today and some of you are going to be practicing, but you need to know that we're going to reverse that in a couple of days. And the ones of you who were practicing today will be doing a puzzle in a couple of days. It may not be the same puzzle in the same practice, but you want stuff that looks equally good to kids. That's a sign of respect. Everybody's task needs to be as engaging as possible, as much of the time as possible. Their work needs to be equally powerful. In other words, to focus them on understandings, to require thinking and problem solving, to require them to generate ideas. Those things not only are signs of respect, but they send a growth mindset message to you, from you to them. It builds trust with you. She does think I can do good stuff. It contributes to a sense of community when it's evident that you respect everybody's possibilities. Kids are more likely to do that. If they see somebody as looking like winners and losers, that reinforces that to them. The work that's respectful is much more motivating. So you have to attend to a number of things, but helping kids understand that that's how the world is. There is no room of adults you could find where everybody's in exactly the same place with their knowledge of geography, their capacity to fix a circuit, their ability to swim, their ability to do fractions or trigonometry. It's just not the case. We aren't like that. So the best we can do is find the right end of the pool and go. One of John Hattie's lines that is one of my favorite that I wish I had known earlier, just because it's a good phrase. I understood the idea, but the phrase is great. He says our job as teachers is to ensure +1 learning, +1 learning, meaning that our goal when we go into the class every day is to help each kid move forward 1 chunk. He doesn't define what that step or chunk is, and it would differ in different classes, different days. But we need to have in our head, I have a sense of where this kid is, and the kid and I need to have a sense he's moved forward today. And that's true for the kid who's the fastest in the class and the kid who's struggling most with language or whatever it is we're teaching. Okay, let me try another one here. This one says, having in mind that in secondary education, we teach English for 2 or 3 hours a week, how easy is it to apply differentiated learning in a classroom that has a lot of students in it? So I will tell you right off the bat, I've never said differentiation was easy. And beyond that, I have never said that teaching was easy. I think teaching is gut-wrenchingly hard, and differentiation is a layer harder than that. What I do say is I think the kids are worth that, and I think we're capable of that if we grow at it slowly, 1 step at a time, just 1 step at a time. But let me show you a couple of things that I think would be possible. So let me back up again for a minute. Think about, I can't answer this for you, you would need to know this, but think about how much time you spend in front of the class talking directly with the kids like I'm doing today, so I'm a terrible model, and having them respond as a group. Raise your hand if you can do this. Tell me an answer to this thing. How much time do you spend doing that versus having your kids work at something alone or with a partner or in a group? I'm asking you that because that's usually the problem. Usually because of those pictures of how to play school that we have in our head. We see the teacher up there telling a really lot and kids answering briefly, but not necessarily sitting and practicing and trying something out. And so teachers will often say to me, I can't differentiate because I don't have enough time to do what I need to do as it is. Now, only teaching 2 or 3 hours a week is a challenge. Time is the teacher's greatest gift. And when you're low on time, you've got an uphill climb already. But what we know about learning is kids don't learn by somebody telling them. They have to learn by practicing, by trying it out. So if you're trying to talk with them about how to do a dialogue on a vocabulary set that they've been working on, you might model it with yourself, talking to yourself. You know, this person says this and I'm standing here, and then I move over here and respond to say, show them what a conversation looks like. Or you might videotape a conversation with yourself, talking to yourself, and let them see that. Or you might have a student from another class come in and do it with you, or a teacher who's on a planning period or anything, but you want them to try out that thing. And so you are going to give them a chance to try a dialogue. You may then say, okay, I'm going to give you a task card, a card that's going to tell you what to do. And your task card has a sticker on the front. Some of the stickers are bright green, some of them are bright yellow, some of them are orange. And I want you to find any person who has a sticker of that same color and sit down and do that task with them. I could arrange those colors in different ways. I might want you to find somebody, I might one day say, I want you to find somebody with a sticker who's a different color. That might be, I really want you to work with somebody who knows more or less than you do and see what you all can figure out together. Find one of the same color. I've put stickers on people's work so that I have kids that are in a general range, not a point, but a general range. And some of the kids in that range know more than some others. So I want you to talk to each other, help each other out, see how far you can go with that. You could give them 5 minutes to do that or 7 minutes to do that. And that would be more valuable to them than just continuing to talk with them and practice it at the board. So ask yourself first, how often do my kids work independently or in pairs or in small groups? And if the answer to that is when I have them an hour, they probably do that for 15 minutes. Then spend that 15 minutes sometimes giving them differentiated work to do rather than all the same work. It won't take any more time than the 15 minutes you spent having them do all the same work. If your answer is 20 minutes or 25 minutes or 30 minutes, that's all the better. But if it's some days we don't get around to that, or mostly they just answer in class, or some days maybe a minute or two to work by themselves, then look at that balance and see if you can adjust that balance. Because when you can get more time for students to be the workers instead of you, that's a good thing for learning. And that time that you have bought is the time that I would get them to do differentiated work. But let me give you an example of some things that might work for you for differentiation in a class. And these examples I have here, I think, are mostly secondary when there's not very much time. This is a class, my examples are going to be not English examples, they're going to be other world languages because that's what well, we do, of course, have English as second language. That was a silly thing. So just look here. This is a Spanish class. Students have been working on vocabulary related to their body. What's the Spanish name for hand, finger, knee, ear, back, face, nose? And after some number of days with all kinds of different practice on the vocabulary and trying sentences out and that kind of thing, the teacher put kids in pairs, and she asked students to pick up a clipboard in the front of the room, or perhaps she brought them around, and to work in pairs to do this task. The target group, which means the group she feels like is about where she would think they should be in the class at this point, doesn't mean they're amazing Spanish students because they haven't been in the class very long, but about where she would expect them to be. If Georgia and I are working with this, she's going to look at her clipboard, and on it is a page that has 12 funny looking aliens, sort of like the one that's on the slide you're looking at. And Georgia is going to pick one to be the alien that we're going to work with. And my job is to keep asking her questions about her alien, which she's going to answer with yes or no, but also has to answer in a complete sentence. So if Georgia says to me, does your alien have 5 fingers? I either have to say, yes, my alien has 5 fingers, or no, my alien does not have 5 fingers. And every time she answers, I'll either be able to keep or eliminate one of the aliens on the sheet until I have finally been able to say your alien is number 7. It's the only one that's left. She had in this class an unusual group of students, and you may have some of these. They were students who spoke Spanish fluently in their everyday lives. They were Spanish speaking young people, but many of them had been in places where they had not learned formal Spanish and did not really speak it with what would be sort of business accepted structure and function. So they also worked with the clipboard with the aliens on it. But student B, after he says, Carol, does your alien have 3 noses? And I say, yes, my alien has 3 noses. Then that kid has to ask me, why would your alien have 3 noses? What good is that in Spanish? And I have to make up an answer in Spanish and answer it. So again, she has them speaking much more extensive Spanish than the others because that's where they are, but they need to be in this class to learn more formal structures. There's a group of kids always in a language class and in a math class and in a science class and in a sewing class that are struggling. And so to help that group, depending on the nature of the class and that group of students, the teacher did one of 3 things to help them do the same activity that the target group did. Same activity, just a leg up, some scaffolding to get there. She might give the kids on the clipboard a list of possible questions they could ask, or a list of vocabulary of the body, or a brief period where she met with them at the start of the activity to model and coach them on how to do it. After the kids had done that in class, each of them got a blank sheet of paper to sketch out and design their own alien. They put the teacher numbered them and put them on the board. And then the class went around and a kid was, if it's my turn, I pick an alien. I want to do alien number 17. And so I go around the room then and say to any kid in the room randomly, does your alien have 3 antennae? And if the kid says yes, then this one can still be in the running. So everybody in the class is participating at that point. This would take, I'm guessing 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes of a class period, but it would be really memorable and the kids would be really putting stuff to work and feel really engaged and in charge of what's going on. And sometimes that carries you much further than just another sort of everybody do the same thing activity. One teacher says in her language class that she gives kids some prompts, what she calls free answer prompts at the beginning of a class. And here's some examples of those. Explain any grammar rule in English as if you were the teacher. Any rule that we've worked with in grammar, write it down and explain it as though you were a teacher. You could have them do it in Greek or in English. If it's 3rd year, people learning English for the 3rd year, you might try it in English. Otherwise, you might have them try to write and explain the grammar rule in English. Ask students to write a fictional story using words that you have just projected on the board. Ask students to describe a key conflict in a novel that your class is reading or a story that they're reading. Ask students to respond to something that they've read or watched, read at home, watched on television. What she's doing is getting the students to, and some of these, like the respond to something they've read or watched, might be in Greek, whereas the grammar rule explanation might be in English. She really finds this to be helpful as a differentiated prompt because the kids will find a way to do it in the best way they know possible. So asking students to write a fictional story that uses the English words on a vocabulary list, and they have to write it in English, some kids will be able to write a much more fluid story with many more aspects in it than others will be. I'm not a fan of that all the time, of open-ended questions as a way to differentiate all the time, because what I finally discovered is that kids don't know how to push themselves the next step. They know how to do what they know how to do. So it's a formative assessment, but it doesn't push them any further. I kind of like giving them something that's going to push them from their point of entry much of the time. But some of the time, this is a good thing. And if you had a free response question every once in a while that everybody could answer, then kids can, if you gave them 2 or 3 questions, they could pick the one they wanted, the one that they thought was most appropriate, and everybody would be working on the same question at the same time. What struck me, and that I added to this when I saw what this teacher was talking about, is that these free answer prompts actually become a formative assessment. And it took me a long time to realize that in my teaching. I don't always have to give a separate formative assessment. Any piece of homework, class activity that kids do, I can use as a formative assessment to understand where they are. Here are some questions, that a teacher provides at 3 levels for her students. This is similar to what I was saying not too clearly a minute ago. She may put up at the beginning of class these 3 questions. What's the difference between tu and vous in French? Use tu in a sentence to ask how someone's doing. Use vous in a sentence to ask someone what their name is. And the student picks which one to do. And if they have more time, they can answer more than one. And at the end of the week, not right on one day, but at the end of the week, she will say to the kids, she never says, how many did you get right? How many of you did all 3? If you can complete all 3 questions, it means you've mastered the topic we've been learning. If you can complete number 1 and number 2, it means you're proficient, but you need a little more practice to master the topic. If you can complete number 1, it means you're progressing in mastering the topic, but you need some more study and maybe to ask a few more questions about what you don't understand. What she's doing there is to help the kids understand their progression and how things are going for them. That's something you could do in a language class that takes just a few minutes, gives the kids an opportunity to really think about and apply what you've been doing, and then kind of go on from there. So I want to share one more with you that's a crazy one, but it was one of my goofy. By the way, I'll be glad to give a copy of all this to Georgia so she can share it with you if you're wanting to see other things. When I was teaching, this for me would, if I were in a class teaching a language like English to Greek speaking or speakers of other languages, I would transfer this from my English class, I believe, to that class. It was the most amazing accident I probably ever generated in class. My students were learning grammar, which they truly hated. And I have to tell you, I hated teaching grammar too. We don't have any evidence that learning the grammar of your own language helps you write or speak your language better. That's just not where it comes from. Learning English grammar will help clarify Greek grammar for your students. But learning Greek grammar is not the very best way to learn to speak Greek. Nonetheless, for a variety of reasons, you're expected to teach it. There's stuff they need, so we teach grammar. One of my goals in class was to make what the kids did as engaging for them as possible. And yet at the same time, keep it really focused on important stuff. It was just, how can I take this grammar stuff that's basically yucky and make it engaging? And every time they realized we were going back to grammar, they'd get these long faces when they came in. So one day, just out of desperation, I thought, okay, I have to do something today that's better than what I've been doing. So I found in the office a cardboard box top of the kind that comes on a box of copier paper. And I took that upstairs, and with a sharp knife, I cut a circle out of the middle of it. So I had a cardboard box the size of a paper box lid with a hole in the size of it, oh, maybe about the size of a cantaloupe. And because I didn't have anything else, I propped it on a metal chair that was in my classroom. Bad idea, old folding metal chair. And I had a tennis ball that didn't have much bounce left in it. That was an accident that it didn't have much bounce, but I found out quickly that it was a fortuitous accident. So I began to soak tennis balls in water for 2 or 3 days and then let them dry out and use those for the game. Because if they miss the board, they don't go bouncing all the way across the classroom. So what I did then with the kids was to say, I'm going to put you in groups of about 5 people. That's going to be your team. And your job is, as a team, to make sure that everybody on your team learns what's on this piece of paper that I'm going to give you. It's not good enough that you know it. If everybody on the team doesn't know it, you're sunk. Because when you finish with this, we're going to play a game, and you're going to get points in the game. And if you like it, we'll play it again sometime. And you'll keep getting points until at the end of a certain number of points, you just might get something nice to happen. Well, kids like games just real well, and seventh graders are certainly no exception. I think these guys were eighth graders, but anyhow, I gave them things to learn with a specified length of time, with the notion that everybody had to be as proficient as possible with it so the game would go well. And as the students studied together and drilled out loud, can you say this list? Do you know what this means? How would you explain this? I took notes, and this was about halfway through the year. So I had some sense, because of assessment and that sort of, watching carefully where kids were, but I learned a lot by walking around. And I got quickly kids who were really proficient with this, kids who were trying really hard, but just couldn't hammer it in there fast enough, and kept those notes with me. And then when it was time for the game, I said, okay, guys, here's how this works. I have put a piece of tape on the floor. When I call a name, that student needs to come and stand with your toes on the tape. I'm going to ask you a question. If you can't answer the question, don't worry about it. We'll do this again and you'll have another chance. No problem. We're not going to get all the questions right. But if you can answer the question, then I'll give you the tennis ball and you can throw it at the board. And here's how that works. Remember now, all I have is a cardboard box with one hole in the middle. If your ball hits the box, you get 1 point. If it goes through the hole, you get 3 points. So we played with that. And I'll come down in just a minute to some things I learned. But the kids were pretty good with it. And they were certainly much more interested in that than sitting with drill and practice sheets at the table. So I asked every kid a question, everyone that I called on, I asked a question about something that was on that sheet that I had given them. But based on what I knew of the kids and what I had observed, I differentiated the questions as I asked them. So for example, if we were looking at the verb to be, and Jonathan came to the front of the room, I might say to him, Jonathan, I'd like for you to repeat the list of the verbs to be in the same order that we've been using them in class, and you have 1 minute to do that, go. And he would need to say is, am, are, was, were, be, been, being, seen, feel, appear, look, sound, smell, and taste, which, trust me, Jonathan could do in less than a minute. And then I'd give him a chance. If Golden came up, I might say, Golden, I want you to give me 2 words that are part of the verb to be. You have 30 seconds, go. And if he said is and was, he's good. So I'm differentiating the complexity of the questions based on what I understand about the kids' current level of knowledge. And what happened was really amazing. Let me get to this red thing now. After a while, the kids got tired of the box top flying off the chair every time somebody hit it. And so Mark Culp and his father built a plywood board. We began to call this game Gramball, G-R-A-M-B-A-L-L. And this was the Gramball board. It was about 4.5 feet tall, 5 feet tall maybe, and 3 feet wide. And it had a small hole at the north-south, at the north, south, east, and west, and a bigger hole in the middle. And here was one of the really cool things that happened. There was no correlation between a child's capacity to remember the grammar and his ability to hit the small hole. So there were a lot of kids who got simpler questions, who made more points for their team, which made them heroes. And the next time they were really motivated to learn that grammar because they wanted to be able to hit that hole again. I was differentiating the questions, and I want to say that to you clearly. Never did any student say to me, Ms. Tomlinson, how come some kids got easier questions than others? A, I think they already knew the answer to that because they know the truth of learning. B, they understood differentiation. And honestly, when we were playing this game, they weren't even attuned to that. It was just about the points. So kids who were unmotivated to learn grammar in that way got more motivated, but the kids who knew what was on that sheet of paper also got really motivated to be thinking about it more deeply because they were afraid they might get another one of those weird questions. In time, the game got more sophisticated. And I would say to the kids, you know, the goal of this is to listen and learn. And so if I'm asking a question and somebody's answering a question and I see anybody at your table talking, you're going to lose 3 points. It got really quiet. Later, I said, okay, I'm going to every once in a while ask you to repeat the question that I just said. If you can repeat it, your team gets 3 points. If you can't, they lose 5. Well, boy, did people start listening well. Later, I did the same thing with the answer. I'm going to ask you to repeat the answer your friend gave. If you can repeat it, get 5, lose 3. I mean, lose 5, get 3. And then the big one was, every once in a while, I'm going to accept an incorrect answer. If anybody hears me do that and you challenge me and you're correct, your team will get 10 points. If you challenge me and you're wrong, you'll lose 15. The kids loved the heck out of this game. They would have played this game 24 hours a day if they could. They asked to play it again the next year and the following year after that. It was just the best thing on the block. And if I had given them all the same drill and practice to use in an hour to work with them and given them 25 minutes to play and to learn and 25 minutes with the game, it would have been a good use of that hour as long as what I had given them to do was useful. Okay, let me come back to one more of these questions because as usual in my life, I'm going to run out of time before I run out of stuff. And I want to come back to one that I mentioned to you earlier. Does summative assessment support or undermine the aims of differentiated learning? Your questions are really meaty and thoughtful. Formative assessment is meant to mentor students, not to judge them. It's to help them learn how to learn better, to understand where they are and how to get better with something. Summative assessment is meant to judge. It's important to remember that assessment is a process, not a moment. And so if I introduce some new material and do a formative assessment today and tomorrow, and then the 4th day, and then we add a little more and I do another formative assessment, and all the way down the line, I'm giving those things back with feedback, not grades or numbers or anything else, just specific feedback that helps the kid understand what they did right, what they did wrong, and how to get better. Those 3 things. What'd you do right? What isn't there yet? And how do you get better? What do you need to do next? Then the assumption is that they will keep getting better, especially if I'm working with them in small groups and going around and giving them things they need to do in differentiated tasks. So that by the time of the summative assessment, they will have a much better sense of how ready they are for that thing. Good formative assessment strategies should help summative assessment outcomes, especially if you remember Wiggins and McTighe's notion that curriculum should give you the knowledge, understanding, and skill, essential knowledge, essential understanding, and essential skills, which I've called KUDs. Those KUDs need to be what you assess, and they need to be what you are instructing as you're assessing. That straight arrow from the curriculum through the instruction, through the assessment, through the instruction, through the assessment is really necessary for kids to be able to make those parts come together. But if you're doing really slick formative assessment, they should be better prepared for summative assessment. Still, though, there are issues. Lots of different kids have different issues. I've taught students who did much better on summative assessments because they can't sit still. If they could stand at a counter in the room and complete the assessment while they were standing up and wiggling, that's fine with me, as long as they're not bothering anybody else. I have had kids who, for a variety of reasons, including physical handicaps, but others too, simply cannot hold a pencil and write as fast or type as fast as other kids. I'm okay giving them 5 or 10 more minutes to finish it. I'm okay giving some kids part A today and part B tomorrow if I've taken into account what we're going to do to make sure that's not a place he can borrow answers from someone. Experts on summative assessment tell us it's fine to differentiate anything in that summative assessment except the K's and the U's and the D's. In other words, you've got to measure the outcomes that you established in curriculum, taught through instruction and assessed in formative assessment. And so I think it is fine to say to a kid who is brand new to English, really struggling with it, draw me a picture of what you saw here and put words beside it rather than write complete sentences to tell me. I'm not going to give the kid all credit for just words when sentences were what I asked for, especially if writing sentences is the goal, by the way. And if the goal is just the vocabulary, then the kid's fine just to draw the picture and list it. But a summative assessment even should not be a punishment. It should help the kid come out as a whole human being thinking, well, I did know some stuff. So experts would say, not me, I'm not an expert on assessment, but experts say, and give me permission to say, it's okay to put more white space between lines on some kids' assessment because it doesn't all run together for them. It's okay to write some of the assessments in simpler directions. It's okay to have a little bit longer time. A differentiation that I love, and I've only seen somebody do this recently, and I've seen it in 2 or 3 places now. At the end of a summative assessment or a formative one, but especially a summative assessment, teachers who leave a blank sheet of paper and say, on this piece of paper, write everything else you know about this topic that I didn't ask you. That's really revealing. And sometimes you can tell this student's not done all that well on this assessment, but she really knows stuff here. And then you can decide what you're going to do about that, but at least it helps you and the kid, make that choice. So for me, formative assessment is like a coach who wants his team to play a great soccer match, let's say a middle school football soccer team. And he works with those kids every day after school, running the drills and, playing their position and building body strength and looking at tapes and trying to have better strategies. And then over the weekend, they go someplace and play that game. That game is the summative assessment. They are not going to win every game. That didn't mean they're failures. It means they now need to go back and say, what did we learn last week that we did well? And what did we try to learn last week that we didn't do well? And how do we do it better? If you can use that analogy with kids and teach with that in mind and really make that kind of a way of life, let's see how much you got. And then we'll go back just like the soccer coach and say, okay, let's look at what you missed and figure out how to do that better next time. And we'll work on some new stuff this week and some old stuff. And then next weekend, we're going to go out and play another football game and we'll see how we did and keep that going. It's important, I think, to take care of a student's humanity, no matter what we're doing. I think I'll stop after I answer this next question because I don't want to kill you. You all may be asleep already. But it's one of my favorite questions that of many that I highlighted, and unfortunately haven't answered too many of them. But what was your most difficult class in time, and what was the most rewarding one? And so I'm going to tell you 2 stories. I'm a believer in stories. I think they share our vision of the world. I'm going to tell you 2 stories. One that was really hard for me and still is, and one that was a moment that was so wonderful that I couldn't even talk about it for a long time. The first one comes not from my classroom, but from working once I had gone to the university with a group of teachers in the Northwest Territories of Canada, or in a new part of that called Nunavut. Don't know if you've ever seen that on the map, but it's way up near the Arctic Circle. Everything's frozen most of the time. an airplane flies in twice a week, and if you're lucky, out twice a week if the weather's okay, so you can't come and go too fast. There aren't very many buildings in town, and if there are, you'll see a little store that sells sweatshirts, dried fish, and auto parts. The strangest conglomeration of stuff. The teachers up there are teachers who really care about what they're doing. The Canadian government pays really good salaries for teachers to go, but you won't stay there if you aren't really an inveterate teacher who just wants to help kids. And those kids have incredibly hard lives because, as is the case with many minority groups, they have been not well treated over time, and their people have suffered, their communities have suffered. And so these kids are far, far behind, and there's alcoholism in the communities that make it difficult. The natives there, the Inuits, still live a very close to the land life. They eat mostly fish and things they can harvest in a short growing season. And with other people that are there, the airplanes fly in their food about once every 6 weeks, and you better put what you want on that list because it's going to be 6 more weeks before you get any more groceries. Anyhow, at the end of a session, when I had been working with those teachers at a conference for several days and was amazed at the way they were thinking and what they were doing, a teacher said to me, "What do I do with grades here? My students are working as hard as they can. I'm working as hard as they can. If I use the Canadian rubric and grading system, nearly all of them will fail." And I paused for a minute, and I did what many of us in schools are prone to do. I must have thought to myself, so what's the right answer? What do the experts say? And I talked to him about 2 or 3 things that I thought he could do with students to make the grades more understandable, perhaps even a little better. But I said, if the rule is that you have to use the provincial standards to rate the kids, then that's what you'll have to do. And his face fell in that moment in a way that looked like I had just sucked the life out of him. And I saw that, and I should have had enough sense at that moment to correct something. But I didn't really until I got on the plane on the way back home. And I realized, you know, Carol, there is no rule in the universe. There is no school rule. There is no provincial, national rule that is worth the soul of a child or a teacher. And not only had I said to him, do something that is going to be incredibly painful to your students and doesn't take into account at all their life circumstances, just follow the rule. And if I had one wish as a teacher, it would be to find that guy again and correct myself. And I want you to remember that too. There may be ways you think you're supposed to do something. If it's damaging to kids, think about that before you go do it. The quick answer to the one of you who asked about grades, and I'll be glad to give Georgia some information on this if you'd like, is a process of grading called 3P, P is in paper, 3P grading, developed by several experts in formative assessment, actually early as the 1970s, I think, or 80s. And these folks say that grades are more meaningful to students if we report 3 separate grades, never average them. The first P is performance. How is the kid doing in English right now on those goals that I specified? Given what he was supposed to know, understand, and be able to do, where is he? That's performance. Process is, how is this kid working? Does he ask questions when he's stuck? If he makes a mistake, does he learn from that? Does he accept feedback as a way to get better? Is he persistent with something when he doesn't first give it, or does he bunch up the paper and throw it down? How well does he work in terms of the way we know lead to success? That's the second P, process. And the third P is progress. Given where the kid started, where is he now? How much has he grown during this marking period? Those 3 things are really, as it turns out, the parts of Carol Dweck's growth mindset. Our goal is the performance, but if you work hard and you work wisely, which is the process, you will grow. And if you continue to work wise and hard, there's no reason to believe that you can't reach and exceed what we set out as our goals. Maybe not on the same day, but you can continue to learn until you master it. And that's true for the vast majority of kids in our schools, including many who don't think so. So 3P grading. And I wish I had known that to share with that teacher in Nunavut as well. Best story, when I had taught in middle school for 20 years, I made what at the time was a really wrenching decision to leave there and go to teach at the university. I really thought I would retire from that school with a walker and a watch or something. Loved my whole time there, still look at it as probably the best part of my life. I made the decision to leave there to go to the university because we had recently gotten a school leader who, in my opinion, was just an unacceptable leader, and I don't think I would say immoral, but an amoral leader and human being. And I was watching him do things that were just unthinkable to me, to other people, and to really good practices that that district had established over a long period of time. And I had a sense that he was going to be there for quite a while, and he was there for about 8 years. And I thought, I don't think I can do this without saying things that are going to be harmful to me and other people. Let's just say that. So the kids and I did lots of stuff at school. We took some trips. We put on a play for the whole community, all kinds of stuff, projects that were big deals to them. And so I didn't tell them that I was leaving until the very end of the year, because I didn't want those things that were special to them to be diminished. And when I did, it was so hard for me to tell them that I couldn't talk about it much. And it was so hard for them to hear that they couldn't figure out how to talk about it. And so we just sort of didn't for that last week of school. And on the about 4 days before the end of the year, we had a parent conference, which we do in the US. Kids' parents were called in to meet with all of his teachers before school started. And we all talked about how he was doing and what might be useful to help him continue. And of course, the meeting ran over, and all of us with classes are sitting there bouncing in our seats because we don't want a room full of kids upstairs with no monitors. And so when the meeting finally ended, I ran down the hall and ran up 2 flights of stairs to get to where my room was. The bell had rung several minutes earlier for homeroom. And as I got to the top of the steps, I thought, wait a minute, there are kids in the hall. And then I stopped, and it's one of those things where you're reacting quickly. Wait a minute, those are my kids in the hall. Why are my kids in the hall? Why are they standing against that wall? And my teacher instinct wanted to say to them, what are you guys doing out here? But my experience said, find out more before you sound like you're accusing. And so I walked up the steps really slowly, the last few, looking at the kids on both sides as I went, trying to figure out what they were doing or hoping someone would spill the beans. And as I began to walk by them, every one of those kids said to me something that I had said to them when they came in the room or left the room. I stood in the doorway every day when they came and went so I could speak with them briefly. And every one of them said something to me that I had said to them that had some meaning to them. So I'm walking down the hall with 15 kids on the right and 17 on the left. And in turn, each of them would say something to me that had been meaningful to them in a way that I had never even considered. I did that just to sort of be there. It was not a greatly huge thing. I mean, I wanted to speak to them, but it never struck me, I guess, that those would be things they carried away with them at the end of the year. It, for me, was the best possible conclusion to that part of my career, because it affirms so many things that I believe about classroom environments and teacher-student connections and that kind of thing. So I guess 2 things. Remember the kids first, including the second thing, when there are rules that you think are going to be punitive to the kids, see what you can do to tweak something or other in there so it doesn't necessarily have to be that way or be as harsh as it might be. Okay, Georgia, I have talked so long that everybody's probably dead at your end.
First of all, I would like to thank you so much. I can't understand how you've made it talking for 2 hours without even a sip of water. I have drunk three glasses of water. Okay. What can I say? Emotional and inspiring. If I had to use 2 adjectives, I got really emotional, and I think it's because you always talk and write from the viewpoint of the teacher, and that's why we can all relate to what we hear and what we read. It's the reality. It's the reality of the teacher, and I would like to thank you very much. Some people say they're in tears, and I frankly believe them. What can I say? I wouldn't like to hold you for more questions because we will definitely have more questions. Our next chapter is on assessment, so I will send you an email, and you can send me some of the 3P that you've proposed. That would be great help. And I would like to share something with you before you leave. Hopefully, I will find it. Give me a moment. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. This is the closest I can find to visualize. You are a guiding light.
I love that. That's a beautiful thing.
Thank you for that. And since we had no problems with connectivity, I would like to give you a sense of what it would be like if we could be in an auditorium. So please turn on your cameras, turn on your microphones, and do what we would do if we were in a big auditorium. All the participants, please, let us see each other.
Yes, that's a good thing when you're teaching online, to see each other.
And
Κάνε το share.
Stop sharing. Okay, thank you, George. Thank you, George. Okay, now we can see each other. Please turn on your cameras. And what we usually do at the end of a wonderful speech is this.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
it was great.
Wonderful.
It was a great experience.
Awesome.
I will send you feedback.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
so
you,
much.
Mrs. Tomlinson.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
I think it's lunchtime now for you.
It's been a pleasure. Georgia already had me excited about working with you, and I now, from seeing her, understand why you're working so well together. And I salute you and hope you not only continue together, but share your understanding and enthusiasm with other people in your school. That's a big deal.
We will not lose touch, that's for sure. Thank you so much for being with us. Eternally grateful.
Good evening to all of you, what's left of.
Thank you.
It's been
so
an
much.
honor.
Bye-bye.
Nice to speak.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you
very
very much.
much.
Bye.